Good evening. Welcome to the March 4th, 2009 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We have a quorum present, so I'll call the meeting to order. First item on tonight's agenda is to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of February 4th, 2009. Are there any additions and corrections to those minutes? If not, I'll declare them approved as submitted. Before we get into the rest of the agenda, I want to welcome our visitors here tonight. We have a group, fairly sizable group, from the Youth Leadership Rutherford. From I understand it's from Siegel and Blackman High Schools. Am I correct on that? Anyway, I want to welcome all you guys here.
One Oakland.
And one Oakland. Okay, good deal. Well, welcome tonight, and thank you for coming. And hope you come back to more city meetings and be involved in city government as you grow older, like some of the members of this committee here. We have 4 public hearings scheduled this evening, the first of which is an annexation request for approximately 5 acres located on the northwestern corner of Halls Hill Pike and Twin Oak Drive. Helen Salisbury and Mitchell Bowman are the applicants. Ms. Logan, good evening.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. Good evening, Planning Commission members. The study area...
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's a compliment to call me Ms. Logan. The study area is located north of Halls Hill Pike, is along the western side of Twin Oak Drive, and the eastern side of Woods Edge Drive. It's approximately 5 acres, and that includes about 273 linear feet of Twin Oak Drive right-of-way. If you look at the map, the area shaded blue shows the area which we are considering annexation this evening. Current city limits are located along the northern, the western, and the southern lot lines, so it is contiguous with current city limits. The property is also within the Murfreesboro's urban growth boundary, so annexation will be relatively easy to effect. The City of Murfreesboro will be able to provide its services upon the effective date of annexation. I did want to note, however, that although this property is in MED, Murfreesboro Electric Department service area, MED will not be providing the electric service to this property until both sides of Halls Hill Pike are annexed into the city limits. So the property will receive electric service, so just will continue to receive it from the current source, which is Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation. A neighborhood meeting was held this past Monday at the Discovery School. During that neighborhood meeting, we did discuss the annexation of this property. I personally didn't hear many issues dealing with the annexation, but you should, Planning Commission, conduct a public hearing to consider the annexation of this property. After this public hearing, we'll consider the rezoning. So if you would like, if I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that the public hearing that we're about to hold is for the annexation of the property. If you have any questions either before or after the public hearing, Mr. Adelot and myself are available to answer them for you.
Does the developer or representative for the developer have a presentation they need to make?
Mr. Mitchell Bowman is the realtor for Mrs. Salisbury, and Mrs. Salisbury is the one who requested the annexation, and she's the landowner. He's present this evening. He doesn't have a presentation, but if you need or require any information from him, he's ready to give it to you.
Are there any questions of Ms. Ely or of the representative of the applicant? Okay. Before I open the public hearing, briefly let me discuss the rules that we abide by during our public hearings. When I open the public hearing, you'll be invited to come forward to the microphone at the podium. Please state your name, give your address if you would. Keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes. We will be enforcing the 3-minute rule tonight. And make all your questions and comments to the Planning Commission and not members of the staff or the audience. If you have some questions, we'll make note of those, and we'll try to have the staff address those questions at the end of the public hearing. All that being said, I'll open this public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Seeing nobody come forward, I'll close the public hearing. Any questions or comments from members of the Planning Commission?
No questions, Chairman. I move we recommend approval.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. The next public hearing is a zoning request for the same property, approximately 5 acres, located on the northwestern corner of Halls Hill Pike and Twin Oak Drive, to be zoned commercial fringe, simultaneous with annexation. Once again, Helen Salisbury and Mitchell Bowman are the applicants. Ms. Ely.
Thank you once again. You did mention that this rezoning request is for the property which we just considered for annexation. As I mentioned, it is approximately 5 acres, and that includes the right-of-way. The property owner, Mrs. Salisbury, has requested that you rezone the property CF, Fringe Commercial District, simultaneous with its annexation. The properties to the north are zoned RS-15 and RS-10 and are used for single-family residential purposes. They're the location of the Providence Point residential development and the Woods Edge residential development. If you look to the west, there's property that's zoned RM-16, and that's for multifamily residential purposes, and currently being constructed are the Grove Apartments. Also to the west is property that's zoned CL, and that property is the location of the Providence Point Commercial Center. This commercial center has a vehicle wash, has self-storage, and it has vacant retail space, which is in the form of like a strip mall. To the south and to the east is the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. It's mostly used for residential single-family uses, but there are some scattered commercial uses. There's a lodge just across the street, and down Twin Oak Drive, there's some agricultural commercial uses. The applicant's requesting to zone the property CF, Commercial Fringe, simultaneous with its annexation to allow it to be used commercially in the future. Although the applicant doesn't have any specific plans for the property, she would like to restrict the use to commercial use and feels that that's a better use for the property that's located on these, well, with 3 street frontages, Woods Edge Drive, Hollis Hill Pike, and Twin Oak Drive. The neighborhood meeting, which we held on Monday, was also to give information regarding the rezoning of the property. We did have some questions about the rezoning, and I think that we were able to answer those questions. I didn't personally hear a lot of outcry over the CF zoning, but of course you'll find out what the public really thinks with the public hearing. So I suggest that you have the public hearing, and Mr. Bowman is in the audience still, and you may have questions for him regarding the rezoning of this property. I did place on your table a couple letters from 2 different residents who live in the area. They couldn't be here this evening, but they just are stating that they don't oppose the rezoning, and so you have those, and we'll put those in the file, and those will be a part of the record. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no questions. I'll open the public hearing. Ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak.
My name is Ann Berzicki, and I live at 2511 Bark Place, which, if I may show you, my husband and I own these 2 lots, and we live on this one, so we're immediately contiguous to the area in question. And we do not oppose the rezoning. Our concern is that the drainage in that area from a rainstorm is adequate at this time, most of the time. In an extreme rainstorm, the sinkhole that drains that area actually gushes forth and fills my yards and my neighbors' yards with water. So our concern is that whatever surface there is covered with a large parking lot or a large building prevents water from being absorbed into the ground that normally is, and that water would then end up in our property. I'm sure there are studies that can be done and measures can be taken to prevent that, but I would just like you all to be aware that this is a very wet area, and it becomes a threat to our property and our house when their rain is of that nature. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Nobody? In that case, I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Aylott, can you address her concern about that, please?
Yes, sir, I would like to. Actually, the property out there is very flat, and it's drained by sinkholes. And that's pretty much characterizes that whole area. There is no well-defined stream like Stones River or Sinking Creek that drains through that area. Of course, further to the north is the Bushman's Creek. It comes out of the ground, a full-blown stream, and it comes out basically out of a sinkhole. I'm a little bit familiar with the sinkhole that she referred to. I've seen it in the past when we reviewed plans for Woods Edge. If you can believe that I've been around long enough to review those plans when it first came in. I was on the plan staff here. That whole area is underlain by caves. It's a very karstic area. Across the street, there's a sinkhole as well. There was a permit with the state to improve around the perimeter of that sinkhole. When I say improve, really alter it. They had a UIC permit. They drain into those sinkholes over there as well, but the apartments across Woods Edge actually drain into a system that overflows into the big ditch. We've been able to secure that. This area is going to be a little bit different, and I expect that when we see a site plan for any type of development or a subdivision plat for any type of development, whatever it be, whether it's single-family homes, we're going to have to look very carefully at what's going on with that sinkhole and those sinkholes behind her. She can count on, and we will expect that there will be on-site detention for stormwater. With the new stormwater regulations that became effective in October, the requirements for the downstream stream bank protection just will require it in any event. Right now, what form it will take, I just frankly do not know. When we see a site plan, though, it will be the obligation of the developer to hire engineers that will be able to ascertain and study and offer a plan, and our staff will review it carefully. We may offer suggestions for changing it, and I expect we may very well do that. Often we have a more global view. We're able to use our GIS system to look at the topography. Also, interestingly, I think we may have some data on dye tracing. We've had some a professor at MTSU, Dr. Albert Ogden. He, I think, did some dye tracing on those sinkholes back there, so we may have some data on that about how they operate, and that's something else we would look into. So we're aware of the drainage system over there, that it uses sinkholes. We are concerned. We're going to be vigilant, and I want to ensure that that's whatever form it takes, whether it be a single-family development or a commercial development. And we would expect that there'll be a site plan. If it's more than 5,000 square feet or more than 1 acre, it'll be coming back before this body for your review as well as the staff's review.
Okay. Any questions? There's no questions. We're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, move for approval.
Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. The next public hearing will be a proposed amendments to the sign ordinance regarding height restrictions on attached signage and standardizing the minimum feet required between attached and detached signage and nearby residential uses to 200 feet. City of Murfreesboro's applicant. Ms. Logan, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission. This ordinance amendment for you tonight is a proposed amendment to the sign ordinance that was actually initiated in conjunction with the Planning Department concerning the height of signs in the sign ordinance. Currently, in our commercial districts, we have a requirement that the height of attached signs can only be 16 feet attached to the building if they're within proximity of 200 or 300 feet of residential property. Of course, as our design and architecture throughout the community have evolved over the past few years, buildings are beginning to get taller, and architecture elements have changed. And because of that, we are seeing instances occur where it's a hardship on the developer and also on the city in terms of the height of the attached signage. We feel that the current architecture that's being developed throughout the city would be able to address some of that, and that we were proposing to increase the height of attached signage from 16 feet to 24 feet. We have several instances in the city where items have had to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for variance requests, and also in terms of that signage not really being able to be fit or appropriately on the final design of the building. In addition, we have areas within our ordinance that are inconsistent in terms of how the distances are measured between commercial and residential property. In some areas it's 300, in others it's 200. We're proposing to correct this amendment, to correct that and make it a standardized 200 feet distance instead of a 300 feet distance. And also, we would also like to state that the ordinance will actually give a definition of attached signage. It will state that the areas are to be measured from the actual sign to the property line of the residential property. and it will consider that PUDs are actually non-residential property. We're also having situations where, because a property is zoned planned unit development, specifically over in the Gateway, where there might be a combination of both commercial and residential uses on the same property, in which that it is a hindrance to the surrounding properties in terms of how that is considered for measurement of sign distances. So therefore, in that terms, that will be defined in our sign ordinance. So that's the intent of this ordinance tonight, is to try to provide some flexibility and some more definitive measurements and definitions to our sign ordinance to address what we consider to be an issue currently. Myself, David Ives, Joseph Adelaw, and Mr. Gary Whitaker are all here tonight and able to answer any questions you might have on this proposed ordinance. And of course, we will need to conduct a public hearing.
Okay. Any members of the Planning Commission have any questions before we open the public hearing? Mr. Ives, do you have any comment at this time?
None at this time, Chairman.
If there's no questions, then I'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward to speak about this proposal. Seeing nobody come forward, I'll close the public hearing. If there's no comments or questions, we're ready for a motion.
Move for approval.
Second motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
The final public hearing this evening is the proposed amendments to the sign ordinance regarding changeable copy signs. The City of Murfreesboro's applicant. Mr. Whitaker, good evening.
Thank you, Chairman. Staff proposes changes to the sign ordinance dealing with changeable copy signs. Currently, our sign ordinance prohibits any computerized signs at all, period. What we propose to do is to allow limited types of changeable copy signs and identify 5 categories of changeable copy signs. We've had requests to do this from the BZA as well as from the business community and the sign companies to better define those types of signs. I have a brief PowerPoint to illustrate those 5 different types of signs that I would like to go over now for you. Again, there's 5 categories that we plan to define in this proposed ordinance. The first of which I'd like to talk about are manual changeable copy. One thing I'd like to point out as I go through this PowerPoint, you see the check mark, that means that it will be allowed by the proposed changes. You see a red X beside of it throughout the PowerPoint. That means it would not be allowed with the proposed changes. Currently, we do allow manual changeable copy signs, and they would continue to be allowed with these proposed changes. The next one we'll talk about after that will be the automated changeable copy. Here again, this is one that is currently not allowed, but due to the changes we have proposed, would be allowed. The automated changeable copy signs would be able to incorporate computer operation. The reason we've had such a request for this type is due to the fact that it could be operated from a remote location. Say somebody had a gas price sign, they don't have to go out, change the numbers, could do it from within the station. Actually, they can do it through satellite if they had numerous stores and change it to all the stores. So this would be a change in an increase in the allowable signage that our current sign ordinance allows. The next one is multi-vision. Currently, we do not allow multi-vision signs and would continue that. The next one will be electronic graphic display and then video display. The first one here we're going to talk about again is the manual changeable copy. Here's 2 illustrations. This is 2 gas price signs as well as a reader board. On your left you can see you have 3 illustrated gas prices. They are all manually changed. By that what I mean, somebody physically comes out, takes the numbers down and puts them back up. Same thing with the sign on the right hand. It's a gas price sign, as well as the bottom changeable copy sign, better known as a reader board.
A few things I'd like to point out. This type of sign, they are internally illuminated or externally illuminated. The letters are not illuminated devices. They're typically a plastic or metal type, and light shines through them or shines upon them. And again, currently these are allowed by the ordinance. Automated change, this is one that is not currently allowed, that would be changed to, or will be a change to our ordinance. Now, you've probably seen this type of sign around. It is currently allowed, but it's not currently allowed to be computer operated. That would be one of the big changes we would make. If you see the illustration in the middle, the four, basically the way these work is it's some type of clear material, plastic type material that the numbers or letters are on. As you change the numbers, they basically scroll up or down and to indicate whatever the price change that you would like. Now, this particular one is a scrolling type. They're widely used in the industry, currently used in the industry, and again, we would allow these to be computer operated. This is just another illustration of an automated changeable copy sign. This is not the scrolling, but this is what we call a flip matrix. The one on the left-hand side, the way it works is you have a solid color background as the plastic or whatever material rolls around to indicate the segments of the number or letter that you wish to project on the sign. The one on the right is a flip matrix, and actually they just roll over to indicate the numbers or letters. Again, both of these could be computer operated. Now we'll go to a multi-vision sign. These are currently not allowed, and in our proposal would not be as well. The way the multi-vision works, it's typically, most of them you're going to see are a tri-vision type of sign. They have multiple on each different face. They're typically horizontal, vertical slats, and on each face of that slat, as they index around, the sign will change copy, as you can see here in the video. We'll let it change through here. Again, these would not be allowed. Next is electronic graphic display. These are currently not allowed, and we would continue not to allow this type. The particular one that we're showing here is an LED sign. It is a quite large LED sign, but what makes this different from the other type of signs, basically the image is created by a light or a bulb or some type of illuminating device. This one just happens to be an LED. Also in this category, you would have plasma, LCD, fiber optics, bulb type signs, or projected type signs. And I have illustrations of all these, or at least the projected type and the bulb type. This is the same LED type sign, just a smaller version. If you notice that they are static displays, it's not a video, it is static display, and that's what differentiates this from the final one we're going to go to in a minute. The image, whether it's instantaneously goes to it or whether it fades in or out, is how we've described it. And for each of these categories, we have definitions, and basically includes all the verbiage that I've been going over for these type of signs. Here we have an LED price sign. This is a bulb type sign. It does fall in this category, again, because it's an illuminating device. One thing I would point out is this type of sign is not widely used anymore. It's being faded out. It is typically they're being changed out with other type of signs. This is an example of a fiber optics. And this is a projected type sign. Basically, you can project these on any vertical surface. This one's projected up on a building, as you can see. Now we'll go to the video display. Again, The big difference between the two categories, as you can see, this one's rotating, moving. The best way I can describe this is your television at home. Same thing that fits in this type of sign would be, as far as the display, would be LCD, fiber optics, bulb type, LED, plasma, or projected. Could also fall in this category. This is a LED, just a smaller version. This is an interesting projected video type sign. This is being projected on the side of a building. And another projected example of a projected type sign. In summary, what we're trying to do with these proposed changes is define 5 types of changeable copy signs. The proposed amendments will expand the allowable signage that we currently have. It will allow computerized flip matrix, scrolling, and segmented types of signs. Manual changeable copy signs will be able to be converted to automated changeable copy. So if you have an existing manual changeable copy, you want to change it out, then that would be allowed. Now, as far as the size of those type signs, would be dictated by the ordinance that's currently adopted. And then automated changeable copy signs can be incorporated into off-site permanent signs, i.e. billboards. What would allow there, if you have a billboard, you want to incorporate on the computerized type signs that we would allow, you could do that, but only to a maximum of 15%. And the reason we limit that to 15% is because of the size of the billboards. They're very large, and we went through, staff had looked at them. We took several different sizes, and that's how we came up with that 15% number. Continue to allow the reader board type of signs. And the proposed amendment would not change the status of multivision, electronic graphic display, or the video display type signs, which are currently not allowed. And I'm available for questions before or after the public hearing.
Okay. Any questions from Mr. Whitaker at this time from the Planning Commission? Thank you very much, Mr. Whitaker.
Thank you.
Mr. Alod or Mr. Ives, do you have any comments before we open the public hearing?
No, sir.
Okay. In that case, I'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
Good evening, Mr. Land, members of the Commission. My name is George Huddleston. I'm president of Huddleston Oil Company, 806 Old Fort Parkway. We have several Shell and BP convenience stores, and they have very strict guidelines as to what they allow image-wise. They allow the plastic numerals that I have a copy here of. This is our BP numeral, and no, I'm sorry, this is our Shell numeral, and this is our BP numeral. If I were to throw these up in the air, they wouldn't be as high in this room as they are hanging on the sign. We change them with a stopper, and that stopper sometimes lets go. Sometimes in the wind, sometimes the stopper's just old, and these things come down, and we have to replace about a third of them every year because they become cracked. So far, we've been fortunate, and nothing's cracked on any employees' heads, but I'm concerned it's just a matter of time. The only other image that our two companies allow is an LED type sign. Before I get off of the old style, this is a 10-foot T12 bulb that we use to backlight these kinds of signs. Our federal government has said that effective 2012, these are not efficient and they're no longer allowed to be manufactured. So change is coming. It's mandated by our federal government. It's just whether we're going to embrace it now or whether our high school students are going to come and embrace it when their generation is sitting in your seats. the plan that we're trying to outlaw the LED, now Ms. Kerr correctly points out that an LED sign has to be lit all day in the daylight, but my sign manufacturer tells me that he understands that the energy consumption is still about a third in a 24-hour period of what these fluorescent tubes will consume. So we are totally for a static sign. We do not want the same things that staff doesn't want. We don't want flash. I've got to believe that if we can put a man on the moon, then we can write an ordinance that will allow what we want and disallow what we don't want. And my request to you is to allow us to do something other than stoppers. And I've got one location that's too high for a stopper. We have to use a bucket truck. It scares me to death to hire an employee to stand behind a cash register and also ask them to get in a bucket truck and go up 30 feet in the air and change one of these plastic numerals. So we're just strictly looking at it for employee safety. We have ordered an LED sign to be custom made so that it will be mechanically controlled. Now my concern is that this sign will be installed at our John Rice BP store in the next few months. My concern is 3 to 5 years from now, lightning strikes it or something happens when it breaks, and because ordinances like these that are proposed in Murfreesboro are not commonplace around the country, there's no commercially available option for us. So we're having to custom make one, and there's one man in Columbia, Tennessee that's going to get out a soldering iron and put it together, and if he's not around 5 years from now when it needs repair, we're not sure what we're going to get. So we just want something commercially available and safe and energy efficient while we're at it, because we're going to have to do something different in the next few years anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huddleston.
Let me ask Mr. Huddleston a question real quick. So Shell and BP throughout the whole country only allow those or an LED sign. So everywhere in the country either has an LED or those.
They're telling us that that's the only thing that's available.
They don't have any of those little changeable, the sliding, the, you know.
I'm glad you asked about that. We did have a flip matrix sign. The sign that you saw that was the bulbs is our sign out at John Rice Boulevard. We put it up in 1992 with a flip matrix or a flapper sign. In order to keep the ice off of it, you got to put plexiglass in front of it. Well, there's no plexiglass that stays clean and unfogged after the sun and will radiate on it, and then after you got some condensation behind it. So we had also problems with them sticking. Those little magnets up there in the air just didn't like to work well. So they did allow it in 92. They allowed it on a high-rise application. But these signs that we're talking about here is what they call the main ID sign or MID sign. And they don't allow it today, a flip matrix on the MIDs. And the other sign that we're talking about enabling, the scroll-type sign, there's been one up for a decade out at the Exxon at Northfield and Rutherford. Las Casas in Northfield, I'm sorry. And they have problems with them getting out of index. And the numeral will be lodged in between where it's supposed to be and where it last was. So there's some problems with those, and I think that's probably why these oil companies want something that looks good for their image, and they don't like signs that look broken more often than the LED does.
But do Shell and BP allow those types in other parts of the country?
Not today. For new construction, no. There might have been times that they would, but not today.
So everybody at a Shell or a BP everywhere else in the country uses an LED light?
They're using either LED or plastic
So
for
they
new
still
construction.
have plenty of people using the plastic, then, obviously. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mr. Huddleston. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Leslie Dodd Carl, 2553 Pitts Lane. I'm here to speak on behalf of a statewide grassroots organization called Scenic Tennessee, and also two groups here in town who are concerned about what we like to call visual pollution. Of course, that's a very subjective measurement. I want to do two things primarily tonight, and the first one is to talk a little bit about safety. The signs that are allowed now by this ordinance are the type of signs that I personally and the groups I'm speaking of would agree with. The signs that are outlawed by this ordinance are the types of signs that we would believe should be outlawed. This is a national problem. When I found out about this hearing yesterday, I contacted people in 6 different states, all of whom are dealing with the issue of electronic signs and electronic message centers. It's a problem that progressive cities are approaching with an ordinance very similar to what Murfreesboro, or very similar to what the staff has set before you today. And I would gratefully appreciate you taking the advice and expertise of your city staff in the legal department and refer this proposal to Planning Commission, to City Council for approval. The second thing that I want to talk a little bit about is the reasons against a lot of these electronic signs. It's not just a I don't like them kind of thing. There is no test out there yet that can measure effectively the safety of these types of signs. There have been several studies done by the industry, and both of which have been refuted by a study done by the University of Maryland that found both the industry signs on safety. The industry studies done to prove safety were at fault because they were biased, because research is only good if it's paid for by certain people. You can prove anything you want to with an experiment. So I think there's still a serious question about safety for these as far as distractions on driving. And there will be a study coming out in the first of 2010 from the Federal Highway Administration, and then one comes out very soon, apparently, from the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, which should be out in June, that will have a definitive statement about safety of these signs. So I would respectfully ask that you pass on the proposal as prepared by Mr. Whitaker and Mr. Ives to the City Council for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carl. Anybody else?
Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission, my name is William Rush. I'm a representative of Lamar Advertising that Mr. Ives referred to in his brief to you guys. Mr. Leibowitz, our legal counsel, could not be here tonight. He wanted me to come by and kind of reaffirm his position. Agree with Ms. Carl. There's 2 test studies. The only 2 test studies been done. One's by Virginia Tech, another one's by Tantala and Tantala Associates. 2 outdoor advertising industry groups were involved in those studies, but that's not to mean a renowned university would come out with bias. Those are the only 2 studies that have factual data. She's right, the Federal Highway Administration and Mr. Ives has ably provided you in your package phase 1 of a study. It means exactly that. It's phase 1 of a 2-phase study. It identifies how they're going to do phase 2, which will be the field research and data. Right now, every study, the only 2 that have been done, shows the type of technology that we're asking you guys to approve for us is safety neutral. All we're asking is this new technology that will allow us to come into this century and change the copy on our signs be allowed. We don't have flashing, we don't have blinking, we don't have full motion. State law and federal law would not allow that. So we ask you to consider the 2 studies that directly indicate that through facts and data that has been researched that these signs are safety neutral. We appreciate your consideration.
Thank you for your comment, sir.
Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission, I'm Darren Shambly, ASC Signs, 1118 Memorial Boulevard here in Murfreesboro. I just have a few comments to add. I don't want to change the world or anything, but if you've got the ordinance here that's with you, there's more about safety than there is about ordinance. And I don't think we can find anything that says these are dangerous. If there's any anecdotal information that's out there, I'm all for including it if we can find it. But I do believe that if you do adopt this ordinance and it's here, that this information can be left out. There's no solid proof on the safety issue that you have. There's 2 studies that have already been referred to tonight that say these are not a safety issue. So that's number one. The second thing that I have concern with, if you take a look at Section 9 of the ordinance on the back, should any word, phrase, provision, or section of this ordinance be held by a court of competent and final jurisdiction to be unconstitutional or otherwise illegal or invalid, or in the event that the enforcement of any such word, phrase, provision, or section be enjoined by a court of competent jurisdiction, then in either such event all provisions of this ordinance shall be deemed stricken, and no changeable copy sign of any kind may thereafter be constructed, erected, or established in the city of Murfreesboro. So what this means is, if we have a restaurant coming in after somebody's filed a lawsuit, they're not going to be able to have a changeable copy sign. And I don't know if you guys are aware of the difference between on-premise and off-premise signage. Do you guys understand what an on-premise, who an on-premise sign is? That's a company like myself who does signs for small businesses, the sign that's at the location. Billboards are off-site. Notoriously, as we know in this city, lots of lawsuits. So I would prefer to see that, our small business families don't get affected by what could become of this in the future. I'd like to see us pay very special attention to that. Finally, on the LEDs, I'm a little perplexed as to why we're not embracing this technology. It's here, and this. First of all, I'm going to say that I applaud adding of the additional signage that we're talking about doing here. But you ask Ms. Jones about the technology that Mr. Huddleston. That's 1960s and 70s technology. LED is 2000 technology. So when I go to a trade show, what I see is not flipper matrix signs and scrolling signs like that. What I see out there that I've got to figure out what to present is LED. And it can be regulated. There is a way that we can make this technology work in our city. Nobody's asking for it to flash. Nobody's asking it, if you saw those signs and you liked them, that's them at their worst in the presentation that you just saw. That's the worst of a digital sign. It's too over bright, every one of them. You've seen it at its worst right there. Flashing, we're not asking to become Pigeon Forge in Las Vegas like I hear people say. That's not what we're looking to do, and I don't believe the business owners are looking to do that in this town. But what this will do, the message center, is it helps a small business family. People know what Walmart sells. Small business families could benefit from this technology by it being embraced, and I think, most people. And one last thing I would say is people like to talk about we're going to have them all over Murfreesboro. Well, Nashville, we've got 500 square miles in metropolitan Nashville. There's 200 signs that are LED in 500 square miles. And I verified that down with their codes department and Mr. Jocelyn. So, it's not, if we embrace the LED technology, there's not going to be a switch change overnight and we'd be full of clutter. But with that, any questions that I might answer? I would love to propose it. Has anyone been up close with LED technology on the board? Have any of you guys seen it in action? Been close to it? I'd like to propose that we have some time to show off this technology, let people take a look at it, because this debate's going to go on and on. And quite frankly, it's, we're 2 years in now. At some point, we need to decide, we've got new technology, and I feel a little bit like I'm being told to, to go back to doing books on paper as opposed to on a computer. It's, we're in a situation now where the time has come and we need to look at this technology And, the Energy Act of 2007, we ought to be looking at that and paying attention as to what's coming. And, they are more efficient. There's some benefits to this technology. And in this economy, if we could pick up some extra business, it would certainly be beneficial. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Shamley. Anybody else? Nobody's coming forward. I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. Adlott, do you have comments, sir?
Yes, sir, I have a couple of comments, but not very lengthy. What we're trying to do today is to consider an ordinance that will actually expand what we currently allow, and that's the intention. I think I can speak on behalf of staff to some extent that we haven't ruled out future amendments that may expand it further, but we do feel that it's very important that we take very small steps in any amendment process. Something that we're aware of, and I think we need to consider whenever we make changes to the sign ordinance, is that once we permit a type of sign, if we decide later it is a mistake, we can't undo it because of the law, and particularly the sections that deal with grandfathering of signs. Basically, once approved and once it's built, it's forever. So we need to be very careful about what we open up. And we do recognize that this is an evolving field, that there are going to be changes, and we haven't ruled out that we continue to monitor this. In fact, I was kidding with our chief building official before the meeting tonight that this will probably be something he'll be dealing with his entire career as chief building official, regardless of how long that might be. So I want to make that point to you. And tonight is just part of the baby steps that we may be taking on these type of amendments. Mr. Ives, do you have any additional comments?
I do have just a couple. Mr. Huddleston mentioned the 1992 flipper matrix sign he had that had problems. I know, well, I don't know. I strongly suspect that the technology of flipper matrix types of signs has improved since 1992. I know for a fact that they are still being sold today. As are the scrolling types of signs that we saw in the PowerPoint, where essentially there are two spools. They are indexed, and you can do it manually, as some are doing now here in Murfreesboro, or you can connect them to a computer and do it remotely from your office, or from a national office, or from somewhere in Nashville. They're available and they work. Now, is it what everybody wants? Probably not. But they are available. There are a number of gasoline retailers, and while this is not limited to gasoline retailers at all, and you can get these kinds of signs that have letters in them, that you can create words, not just prices. You can create any alphanumeric symbol that you want to with these signs. Now, not many are used in those kinds of applications, but they can be, and they could be under our proposed ordinance. There are a number of gasoline retailers who specifically like the scrolling kinds of signs. That technology has improved too. The technology of lucite or plastic or a variety of other names for a glass-like substance that protects these from weather, that's changed also, as much as the LEDs themselves have changed. So there may have been problems in the past, no doubt there were, but that has probably, I'm quite confident, that has changed also. And knowing that a substantial number of people within that industry embrace, maybe they would use LEDs also if they had a chance, but without that, they use these kinds of signs. I don't believe that Murfreesboro should let any one gasoline retailer or any one company dictate to us the kinds of signs that we have. Quite the opposite. We want to set our standards, and if we set a standard that excluded an entire industry from coming to Murfreesboro because our standards are out of sync, then that would be certainly something we should question. but we're clearly not doing that. As to, I certainly don't want to engage in a debate tonight on the results of the safety studies. I disagree with Mr. Rush that the two tests they have referred to are the only ones with factual data. There are a number of tests that have included all kinds of factual data. I have not seen a test that has specifically said that any moving sign has caused an accident. But the data is, there's a lot of data that says that driver distractions increase the likelihood of accidents. And any sign is a distraction. And no one at this point is proposing the elimination of all signs. To some extent, everything outside the car is a distraction, whether it's a dog or a cat or a cow or another vehicle. All distractions will never be eliminated, but is it appropriate to add this many more? And we feel it's not. I think that the position of counsel in the past has been that it's not, and we don't propose to change that at this time. The part about hurting small business if suits filed, that I don't believe is accurate. We specifically put this severability clause in for one particular reason. If there should be litigation, and it's not only the billboard companies that tend to be litigious in the sign world, if there should be litigation, and if we have somehow miswritten this ordinance, assuming it's passed, and this ordinance, and I'm referring only to the amendments that are included here that are before you tonight on this, and if a section of that were to be thrown out, and if the court should decide that that invalidates the entirety of this ordinance, the city would have no ordinance of any kind about changing signs. And until we could adopt one, absolutely anything that anyone could come up with could be installed, and it would be there as a practical matter forever. What this would do is that if the courts tell us we've done this wrong, we then, as staff, Planning Commission, and City Council, have an opportunity to fix the problem or to perhaps at that time decide we don't want an ordinance, let it all happen. But we will have an opportunity to put in place the kind of regulation we want to put in place and not have an absolute open door that allows anyone to put in anything. I think we would be very risky to delete Section 9 from this ordinance. As Mr. Adelot said, I doubt that tonight is the last time we will visit this topic. And also, not only is Mr. Whitaker and myself likely to be dealing with this the rest of our careers, at some time the LEDs will become the copy machines. At one time, none of us had copy machines in our office, and then all of a sudden, while our competitors had them, we had to have one. And none of us had a fax machine until someone got one, and then everybody had to have one. And now most of us don't use our fax machines anymore. It's all email and text and a variety of things. We still use them some. There will be something somewhere between a year and 10 years from now that will replace LEDs. I have no earthly idea what it will be, and we'll be dealing with that at that time probably. But I would ask that you go slowly, that we approve. I think we are helping a number of people, a number of the businesses that want these kinds of signage. I think it'll help our staff, it'll help the business community, and we will continue to look at other issues as they come along. So we ask that you approve this ordinance as we've written it and proceed to the next steps.
Yeah, I think that nobody would argue that this is the final word in the sign ordinance for the city of Murfreesboro. My involvement in the sign ordinance goes back long before my tenure on this commission, some 20 years ago, and it's like the industry itself the technology is advancing, and the ordinance is trying to advance with the changes to society, and an ordinance that would properly be written to reflect the City Council's desires as far as any limitations on the sign industry. At that time, 20 years ago, I think we were primarily concerned with the portable yellow signs primarily that were pulled out on a little wagon, and sitting in front of buildings. And, those were definitely out of hand at that time, so we had to act to limit those and restrict the usage of those. It became a matter of aesthetics at that time as well as safety. There's a lot to be said for the work that you guys have put in, and the staff has done a great job at doing this, but obviously we will see more changes and more, I think, proposals coming down the pike in the future as things change further. Mr. Gilley, do you have a comment?
Just a couple of comments I want to make, Chairman Lamb. First, I want to thank staff for bringing this to us. We've been looking at this for a long time, and while I realize that it's not the majority of the bulk of what some of the business industry has asked us for, it is a step in the direction of what's been asked for, and as Joseph said, sometimes baby steps are the best to take, and so I think that it does offer more than what we've allowed in the past, and I think that's a good thing. At the same time, I think we also need to continue to look at how else we can keep up with the technology of this industry. When we first started talking about this, I guess it's been a couple of years ago now, about even using any kind of automated or computerized or electronic signage, we got into the issue of could we regulate. The issue was could content be regulated, because we talked about allowing gas prices and time and temperature versus other things. Well, thinking outside the box, staff has come to us now about breaking the signs into types of categories of signs as to what we can allow versus just general information that we were looking at before as to what we would allow to be displayed. And with that thought in mind, perhaps, Gary, there are other subcategories we could look at within some of the electronic versions that we could utilize. And I don't know the answer to that, but if we've been able to look back and break down categories, maybe we can now go perhaps even within LED categories of static versus streaming visual aids on them, something to that effect. Issues about, and I know it's hard to enforce, timing of change of copy, quantity of signs, and sizing are always issues I think we can continue to look at to see how we can work with the technology without it becoming a problem. And no, I agree that we are not probably overnight were we to allow the other type that's being asked for to turn into Las Vegas. Nashville has not. That's true. But at the same time, a good example I can give, if you drive down Cumberland Avenue in Lebanon from when you get off Interstate 40 up towards the square, every other business up and down that stretch of road has an LED, fully automated, seems like sign that there are pictures of little people eating sandwiches and changing, copying little visual images that as soon as dusk hits, it's a nightmare. It's awful to drive that 2 or 3 mile stretch of road. And I know there's somewhere in between that and where we are now that we can continue to work towards, but I think we're working in the right direction.
Mr. Young?
I was going to say, I think Mr. Lamb and Mr. Gilley have summed this up very well. I do appreciate our speakers coming tonight, Ms. Dodd and Ms. Carl and Mr. Rush and Mr. Chamberlain and Ms. Tullison. We hear you. We understand a lot of this. We don't have all the answers, but we are working on it. I think baby steps is a good term that we're doing, continuously working to improve and modernize and update our sign ordinance. So I think what we're going to hopefully do tonight, and I'll make the motion if I may, Mr. Chairman, that we send this on to the council for approval and that we continuously look, Mr. City Attorney, to upgrade and modernize our sign ordinance within what's reasonable and fair to everybody, because small business benefits from these, large business benefits from these, but the city also benefits from an acceptable, usable sign ordinance that's in good decor. So with that, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. I want to once again reiterate my thanks to Mr. Whitaker and Ms. Kerr and the legal staff, Mr. Ives and Ms. McGannon, who have worked really, really hard, as well as the planning department, on trying to come up with a fair ordinance and come up with changes to it that will serve the interests of the city the best. So thank you very much for your hard work. We've got one mandatory referral listed on the agenda tonight. Do we have a second one added, Mr. Headlight?
Yes, sir, we do.
The first one is Winthrop Hall, Lot 79, a partial waiver of a drainage easement. William Calder and Kathy J. Calder are the applicants. Mr. Ives.
Chairman Lamb, this, because of the timing on it, the applicants here were in some concern at the time, and so this has been to City Council and has been approved, subject to Planning Commission review. This is at the very beginning of a drainage easement. If I remember right, at the middle of the drainage easement, there's a depth of 3 or 4 inches in the easement. It's a 20-foot wide easement. There are some ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, considerations that require us, perhaps more so than if that were not the case, to look at whether or not we can adjust our easement without doing damage to the city. And we have looked at that very carefully with, through Mr. Huddleston and the rest of the city engineer staff, looked at the upstream and downstream issues and have concluded that we can waive a portion of this easement to allow the construction and take care of these folks' needs without any damage to the city. So we request your approval of this waiver, partial waiver of that easement.
Any questions? Now we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, move for approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. The other mandatory referral pertains to the purchase of property and a settlement of a condemnation suit. Mr. Ives, you want to brief us on that?
Yes, Chairman Lamb. We sort of have two into one here. This involves the properties that are needed to construct the Southwest Loop the Veterans Parkway, not renamed Veterans Parkway, in the area where it intersects with the current Windrow Road, which is essentially between New Salem Highway and Old Salem Highway in that area. The one that has caused us to come to you tonight is a property owned by Mr. Williams. The city would take a small portion from his lot. This is a house with a rental house, a lot with a rental house on it. Because of the change in the circumstances out there and everything else, he believes that the city's construction of this highway right next to his property is going to diminish his ability to rent this house. He has offered to sell us the entire property at the tax appraised value. We have looked at that situation, and staff recommends that we go forward with that. That also then brought to our attention the fact that we had not brought to Planning Commission for under the referral the purchase of the Morton tract, which is contiguous to it. The Morton tract, I think on your materials, is outlined there. The new Veterans Parkway will sever that property, take a substantial chunk out of the middle of it, and will require that a trailer that's on that has been a rental property for some time will have to be moved. And it's not efficient to remove it or to move it to a new place on this property either. That owner also asked us if we would just purchase the property rather than pay him the damages that we would have to pay for the impact we're having on his property. It turned out that the damages we would have paid him would have been close to the amount of purchasing the entire property. And he preferred that we purchase the property and so that he didn't have to deal with two remnants that he wasn't sure what he would do with. We have already accomplished that purchase. Council has approved it, and we would like, though, tonight, along with this, that Planning Commission ratify that purchase and recommend it. One of the significant impacts, this is not really the time necessarily to be investing in real estate in some respects. I'm thinking of the city's budgetary issues. As we've all been asked, and I think it's pretty well public knowledge that all governmental units have been asked to conserve funds and cut costs wherever we can. Obviously, for the person who has money, this is a great time to buy real estate. Nonetheless, on this issue, this will allow the city to control the development of this important portion of Veterans Parkway. Rather than having two or possibly even three different property owners in this fairly short stretch of road there that's going to be between the new Windrow intersection and the old Salem Highway intersection, there'll be one property owner. And we can assure that the driveway connections and things of that nature that occur in this area will be appropriate to the Veterans Parkway that we are building. So we request your approval of these two transactions.
Any comments or questions?
See, we are buying real estate.
That's right. It's a great time to buy. Mr. Young, you have a motion again?
I'll move we accept the recommendation of City Attorney.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Mr. Adlott, that's all I have under mandatory referrals. The next item, staff reports and other business. Do you have anything, sir?
No, sir.
There's no other business. Mr. Gilly?
Chairman Lamb, one thing I did want to bring up that I've had several constituents ask about while I've got building codes and legal here all together. All the new blue signs that we've gotten that I think that have, the Wayfarer signs that have, Wayfinder signs that have come, was that a federal grant, I believe, that paid for those? Or federal or state grant? Do you know what I'm talking about, Mr. Ives? The blue signs all over town?
All over the county.
Yeah, if you want to talk about visual clutter, those are, I don't know what we were expecting to get. Are we stuck with having to keep those things up?
Mr. Gilly, I certainly do not have an answer to that. I know that wayfinding sign project has been going on for a number of years, and it is a combination of federal and state monies. I'm going to guess mostly federal, but through the state. And I don't know where the design came from. The city did not install those, and there has been some discussion about them that I'm aware of also.
And there are two giant ones around the square that, that just look completely out of place, and then all throughout the city, they look like giant blue construction signs everywhere.
Well, there's beautiful color, though.
Not knocking the color, Chairman Lamb, but
thank you for your comments, Mr. Gilly.
I will pass your comments along, and I don't know what, if anything, could be done if the city would choose to take any further action or not.
Okay.
But I will pass that along and see if I can get an answer for you.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilly. Anybody else? If there's no other business, we stand adjourned.